Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, Emma had never known the warmth of a family. Orphaned at a very young age, she had spent the majority of her life within the cold, sterile walls of an orphanage. The walls were gray, and the atmosphere was even duller. Days blended into one another, each one much like the last, an endless cycle of loneliness and longing for something she could never grasp. The other children came and went, adopted by families, but Emma remained. She was the quiet one, the one who kept to herself, and she couldn't remember a time when she felt truly wanted. Emma was only 5 when her parents were killed in a tragic car accident. She remembered the screams, the flashes of red and blue lights, and the overwhelming feeling of confusion. It was too much for such a small child to process. Her world was ripped apart in a single moment, leaving her to wander through life without the comforting embrace of her mother or the protective presence of her father. The memories of them slowly faded, replaced by a sense of emptiness that grew stronger as the years passed. At the orphanage, there was no one who truly understood her. The caregivers were kind enough, but their attention was always divided. Emma spent hours in her room, staring out the window at the world outside, wishing for someone to take her in. But as time passed, even the thought of belonging to a family seemed like a distant dream, one that Emma wasn't sure she'd ever see come true. The other children in the orphanage played together, sharing laughter and stories. Emma watched them from a distance, her heart aching with every giggle, every shared moment. She didn't know how to join in, how to be part of something when she had never truly known what it was like to be loved. One particularly gray morning, the matron of the orphanage, Mrs. Jacobs, came to Emma's room with a smile that was rare for her. "Emma, I have a surprise for you," she said, her voice warm. Emma, startled by the sudden attention, looked up from her place by the window. Mrs. Jacobs had something in her hand, a small leash attached to a wiggling ball of fur. "This is Max," Mrs. Jacobs explained. "He's a puppy, and he's come to stay with us for a while. I thought you could use a friend." Emma's eyes widened. She hadn't been expecting anything like this. A friend? A real friend? She slowly stood up, her feet hesitating on the cold wooden floor. Mrs. Jacobs knelt down, letting the small puppy, a golden retriever mix with soft, shaggy fur, trot over to Emma. Max's big, brown eyes looked up at her with a look of pure innocence, as if he, too, understood the loneliness that had plagued her for so long. Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she crouched down to meet him. Max's tail wagged vigorously, and he sniffed at her hand, nuzzling her fingers with his cold nose. Emma smiled shyly, reaching out to pet him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a warmth in her chest, a flicker of hope. From that day forward, Max became Emma's constant companion. He would follow her around the orphanage, curling up beside her as she read or painted, and he would sit by the window with her, watching the world pass by. Max was always there, his presence comforting in ways that words could never express. When Emma cried, Max would nudge her with his nose, as if trying to tell her that everything would be okay. The bond between Emma and Max grew stronger with each passing day. Max didn't ask her to speak, didn't expect her to be anything other than herself. He was content to just be by her side. He had a way of understanding her like no one else could. And slowly, over time, Emma began to smile more, to laugh more, and to feel a sense of belonging, something she had never felt before. The days passed slowly in the orphanage, the routine never changing, until the small moments with Max began to offer Emma something new. Max had quickly become a constant companion, his gentle presence filling the emptiness of Emma's life. Every morning, as she walked through the orphanage's cold halls, Max would greet her with his tail wagging excitedly. In the quiet of the afternoons, Max would curl up beside her as she read, his warmth providing her with a sense of peace she had never known before. She had been alone for so long, but now, it seemed that Max understood her better than anyone else. One afternoon, after a long, tiresome day of playing by herself, Emma sat on the steps outside, staring at the other children playing together in the yard. They were laughing, running, and playing games she had never been able to join. A pang of loneliness struck her heart. Why wasn't she one of them? Why couldn't she be like the other kids, surrounded by a family who cared for her, who took her in? She watched them with longing, wishing that, for once, she could be part of something. Max, sensing her sadness, padded over to her and rested his head in her lap. His big brown eyes met hers, and for the first time in a while, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she didn't need to be like the other children. Maybe she didn't need a family like the ones she saw. Maybe she already had a family. She gently stroked Max's head, feeling a warmth spread through her as he nuzzled her hand. Days turned into weeks, and Emma began to realize that Max was slowly helping her heal. He had become her protector, her confidant, her best friend. He was always there when she needed him, offering her comfort and companionship in ways that no one else could. But despite her growing attachment to Max, Emma still carried the weight of her past. Every night, as she lay in her small bed, she would close her eyes and think of her parents. The memory of the accident, the sound of sirens and flashing lights, would haunt her thoughts. Her parents had been taken from her too soon, and Emma had never truly processed the pain of losing them. The orphanage had never felt like home, and no matter how many years passed, she couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. One day, as the sky turned gray and the cold autumn winds blew through the cracks in the orphanage's old windows, Emma sat by herself in the corner of the room, staring blankly at the walls. The other children had gone to play outside, but Emma couldn't bring herself to join them. She felt the loneliness creeping back in, settling like a weight in her chest. Max, sensing her mood, jumped onto her lap and licked her face gently. Emma smiled weakly, her heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. "You're my family, Max," she whispered, stroking his fur softly. "You're all I need." Max's tail thumped happily, as though he understood her words. Emma's heart swelled with affection for the small dog. She couldn't explain it, but somehow, Max had filled the emptiness inside her. He had given her something she hadn't thought she would ever find: hope. But still, Emma dreamed of something more. She dreamed of belonging. She dreamed of a family who would take care of her, who would love her no matter what. Even with Max by her side, there was still a part of her that longed for more. She couldn't help it. She needed to know that she wasn't alone in this world, that there was someone out there who would choose her, who would make her feel like she mattered. Underscore 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 underscore. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Emma's life took an unexpected turn. Mrs. Jacobs, the matron of the orphanage, had called her into her office. Emma's heart raced with nervous anticipation. What was this about? Had someone come to adopt her? Could this finally be her chance to leave the orphanage? She had been living there for so long, watching others find families, but she had never once been chosen. When Emma entered the office, she saw a couple sitting across from Mrs. Jacobs. They were smiling warmly, and their eyes were kind. Mrs. Jacobs looked up and smiled as well, motioning for Emma to sit down. "Emma," Mrs. Jacobs said softly, "I'd like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They've been coming here for some time, and they've expressed interest in adopting you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Was this really happening? Could it be that she was finally going to have a family of her own? She glanced at the Carters, who were smiling at her with warm, welcoming faces. Mrs. Carter, a woman with soft blonde hair and gentle eyes, extended her hand toward Emma. "We've been waiting for this moment," Mrs. Carter said kindly. "We want to offer you a home, Emma. A family." For a moment, Emma didn't know how to respond. Her heart swelled with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. She wanted to say yes, to accept their offer and finally leave the orphanage, but something held her back. She couldn't just leave Max behind. He was her family too. Mrs. Jacobs must have sensed Emma's hesitation, because she smiled and said, "And we've talked about it. We're happy to say that we would love to adopt Max as well." Emma's eyes welled up with tears. She could hardly believe it. They were going to adopt her, and Max. Her heart soared as she looked at the Carters, feeling a sense of safety she had never known. This was real. She was going to have a family. She was going to belong. Max, sensing the change in Emma's emotions, jumped onto her lap, wagging his tail furiously. Emma hugged him close, tears streaming down her face. She had finally found a place where she was wanted. A place where she would be loved, and a place where Max would always be by her side. The days that followed Emma's meeting with the Carters were filled with a whirlwind of emotions, each one leaving her heart racing with anticipation. She had spent so many years in the orphanage, her life governed by routine and isolation, that now, in the midst of such an overwhelming change, it was difficult to grasp what was happening. But one thing was certain: this was real. This was happening. She was finally going to have a family. The Carters' home was everything Emma had imagined and more. The house, with its white picket fence and sprawling backyard, seemed like a place where dreams could come true. It felt different from the cold, institutional walls of the orphanage. The warmth of the home, the comforting sounds of family life, and the simple fact that she was no longer alone in a room, made Emma feel like she had finally arrived at a place of belonging. But it was also unfamiliar, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't yet truly hers. Her first night in the Carters' home was filled with mixed emotions. The bedroom she was given was cozy, with soft, pastel walls and a window that overlooked a garden. It was far from the harsh, institutional white walls of the orphanage, but Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart felt full, but there was still a piece of her that couldn't let go of the life she had left behind. It was hard to forget the loneliness, the empty halls, the nights when she cried herself to sleep, wishing for someone, anyone, to love her. But Max, her loyal companion, was there. He lay beside her on the bed, curling up next to her for warmth and comfort. His presence was the anchor Emma needed. He was her constant in a world that had suddenly become overwhelming and confusing. Emma stroked his fur gently, letting out a deep breath as she allowed herself to relax, even if just a little. The next morning, when Emma woke up, she was met with the smell of fresh pancakes and bacon. The Carters were already up, moving around the kitchen with smiles on their faces. For a moment, Emma was frozen, unsure of what to do. Was she really allowed to be here? Would they still want her after a while? But Mrs. Carter, noticing her hesitation, smiled warmly and said, "Come on, Emma. Breakfast is ready." As Emma sat down at the table, with Max at her feet, the warmth of the meal before her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the food, it was the sense of family. The Carters chatted to her like she was always a part of this. For the first time, Emma began to feel a sense of safety. She wasn't just a guest in their home. She was part of it. Despite all this warmth, Emma still carried the ache of her past. She would spend hours looking out the window, wondering if this could really be her new life. Could she truly be a part of this family? Would they ever see her as more than just a little girl who had been abandoned? Max seemed to sense her doubts. Every time Emma's thoughts would wander back to the orphanage or her parents, Max would nudge her gently, reminding her that she wasn't alone. His brown eyes, full of love and understanding, would always meet hers, and she would smile, her heart lifting in that unspoken connection. No words were needed between them. Max knew her pain, and she knew his. One evening, as the sun began to set and the family settled down in the living room, Emma looked around at the Carters, her new family. They were reading, chatting, and laughing together. Emma felt a pang of longing in her chest. It was a longing for her parents, for the memories she could no longer hold on to. The ache of her loss resurfaced again, and before she could stop it, tears filled her eyes. Max, sensing her distress, immediately jumped up from his place on the couch and padded over to Emma. He placed his head in her lap, looking up at her with his big, soulful eyes. Emma broke down, her tears flowing freely. She buried her face in Max's soft fur, letting the dog's steady warmth and love envelop her. It was as if Max knew exactly what she needed: no judgment, no questions, just pure, unconditional comfort. In that moment, Emma realized something. She was loved. Not just by the Carters, who had opened their home to her, but by Max, who had been there for her through everything. Max wasn't just a dog, he was a bridge between her broken past and the future she had yet to discover. His loyalty was the thread that connected her to this new life, to this new family, and to the possibility of healing. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's fears slowly began to subside. The Carters continued to be patient with her, offering her the space and time she needed to adjust. They never pressured her to forget her past. They simply showed her, through their actions, that she was part of their family now. Every night, Emma would sleep with Max by her side, and every morning, she would wake up to the sound of laughter, breakfast, and the warmth of family. For the first time in years, Emma could see a future ahead of her, a future filled with love, hope, and belonging. Max, who had been the quiet hero in Emma's life, was no longer just a companion. He had become her lifeline, her protector, and the one constant she could trust. And as Emma's heart began to heal, she knew that she would never again be alone. She had a family now, one that included Max, the dog who had saved her heart from the darkness. The days that followed were filled with the gradual transformation of Emma's life. The Carters' home, once foreign and intimidating, was slowly becoming her sanctuary. The once empty rooms now echoed with the sound of her laughter, her small footsteps racing down the hallway, and the soft pattering of Max's paws following closely behind. Each day brought new challenges, but with the Carters' love and Max's unwavering loyalty, Emma was finding her way. In the mornings, Emma would help Mrs. Carter prepare breakfast, a small but important gesture that made her feel like a true member of the family. The kitchen, with its warm yellow walls and the scent of freshly baked goods, had become a place of comfort and joy. Mrs. Carter would patiently teach Emma how to measure ingredients, how to mix batter, and most importantly, how to enjoy the small moments of life that she had once missed. One morning, as they baked pancakes together, Emma spoke for the first time about her parents. It had been the first time she had shared her memories with anyone, and Mrs. Carter listened with a gentle understanding. "I miss them," Emma whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "But sometimes, I don't know what it feels like to be loved, to belong." Mrs. Carter placed a hand on Emma's shoulder and smiled softly. "Emma, you are loved. You belong here, with us." The sincerity in her voice made Emma's heart swell. It was the reassurance she had needed, and for the first time, Emma allowed herself to believe it. The bond between Emma and the Carters deepened as the weeks passed. They celebrated her small victories, learning to ride a bike with Mr. Carter's help, picking flowers with Mrs. Carter, and reading her first book aloud to them at dinner. These moments, once unimaginable to Emma, became a regular part of her life, filling her with a sense of belonging she had never known. But even as her life improved, Emma still had moments of doubt. She feared that one day, she might wake up and find that this new family was just another fleeting dream. The orphanage, her parents' accident, the years of feeling alone, it all weighed on her, lingering in the corners of her mind. But Max, with his gentle eyes and comforting presence, was always there. No matter how heavy Emma's heart felt, Max never judged. He simply stood by her side, reminding her with every wag of his tail that she was no longer alone. One evening, after a particularly hard day at school, Emma sat on the porch, her hands folded in her lap. The sky was painted in hues of purple and orange, the air cool and refreshing. Max, as always, sat next to her, resting his head on her knee. Emma looked down at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you, Max," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've been my rock. You never gave up on me." Max looked up at her, his tail wagging gently, and for a moment, Emma felt like everything in her life had come full circle. It wasn't just the Carters who had saved her, it was Max, the little dog who had followed her into a new life and helped her heal in ways no one else could. The Carters noticed the changes in Emma, too. She was laughing more, speaking with more confidence, and taking more risks, like the time she volunteered to help her classmates with a project, something she would have never done before. It was as if a light had been turned on inside her, one that had been dormant for far too long. One afternoon, as they were all gathered in the living room, Emma turned to the Carters, her heart full. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "I think I'm ready to call you Mom and Dad." Mr. and Mrs. Carter exchanged a look, their eyes brimming with emotion. Mrs. Carter reached out, pulling Emma into a tight hug. "You've been our daughter from the moment we met you," she whispered, her voice thick with love. "And you always will be." It was in that moment, surrounded by her new family and Max, that Emma realized what had truly made her whole. It wasn't just the house, the warmth, or even the Carters' love. The story of Emma and Max teaches us a profound lesson about the healing power of love, companionship, and the importance of never giving up on those who need us. Emma's journey from loneliness to belonging highlights the resilience of the human spirit, showing that even after experiencing loss and abandonment, there is always hope for a brighter future. Max, her loyal dog, played a crucial role in her transformation, offering her unconditional support and love when she needed it most. This bond between Emma and Max reflects how animals, through their simple presence, can help us overcome emotional hardships and find our way to happiness. In real life, this story resonates with countless children and adults who experience feelings of isolation, neglect, or trauma. It reminds us of the importance of showing kindness, offering a sense of security, and understanding the value of unconditional relationships. Just as Max's companionship helped Emma heal, humans, too, can make a significant impact on others' lives, offering support, compassion, and a safe space for emotional growth. The story ultimately teaches us that true family is built not just by blood, but by the love and care we share with each other.